All right, so I've wanted to review manga on this channel for quite a while now, but I haven't been successful with some reviews in the past. And I finished reading this a couple of days ago, and I want to do a review of it because I feel like I have a lot to say about it. So I figured out a way to structure these reviews. Basically, I'm going to do a non-spoiler bit where I just kind of review the book as I usually would, so you can decide whether you want to buy it or not. And then I'm going to do a kind of a spoiler review that's more going to be me just discussing the book and what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it, but going a bit more in depth. So those people who care about spoilers and want to buy the book after my review, they don't have to listen to the entire thing. So I will give a warning when the spoilers come up. So anyway, non-spoiler first. I picked this up on a whim. This was I was in the shops with my friend, and he likes manga. He was one of the people that got me into manga and anime. So he was like, "Hey, you should pick this up because you're into Kevin Smith movies and stuff." I don't think he mentioned that, but he said that it was a lot of talking and stuff, and I interpreted that as Kevin Smith movies, Tarantino movies. There's a lot of talking, not much action, and more character development, which is what I'm into. So he said you should pick this up. He didn't mention that it was anything to do with Death Note, and I didn't know there was anything to do with Death Note until I read the introduction. I would like to mention before I do the review, I've not read Death Note, so I can't comment on the similarities or the references, other than the ones that are just flat out, obviously references to Death Note. So I'm sorry if I miss any of those in my spoiler review. But anyway, moving on. I read the book in pretty much one sitting, which I wasn't planning to do. I picked it up and I was kind of pessimistic about it. I was like, it's not really the usual things I read and watch in the manga and anime, of what I watch and read in manga and anime. So I was like kind of pessimistic. I was like, I guess I'll give it a go. It was also interesting because it's one of the first mangas I've picked up that is written and drawn by someone else. People who are only into comics will kind of be like, yeah, okay, that's commonplace. But usually, and I don't want to say this for definite, but in the ones that I've read, it's usually drawn and written by the same person. So that interested me. So I picked it up. I found it was something to do with Death Note, which meant nothing to me because I've never read Death Note. I started reading it and I started to realize it's a very character-driven story. The main character has an opening monologue, and you realize that this isn't really about what's happening in the book. It's more about the characters and them developing. It's kind of hard to explain. It is akin to a Kevin Smith movie or movies in that vein, where it's less about the plot. There is a plot, much like in those movies, but it's less about that, and it's about the characters and how they react to things, and their discovering their outlooks on life and them learning things. So it's very much a character story more than a plot driven story. And there is a plot. It's basically, if you don't know the plot of the book, it's these two guys write a manga, or they try to create a manga, and that's pretty much it. There's reasons for why they do it. And it goes in depth on how manga is created, and that's interesting. But the primary driving force, at least for me when I was reading this book, the reason it was so interesting is the characters. It's the development of the characters and how they act, and you find out more about them and their outlook on life and their background. And I feel like it was handled really well. I feel like that there's really only two main characters in volume 1. There are a couple of other characters that feel like they're going to be more fleshed out in future volumes, but you only really go in depth with two main characters, and that's the writer and the artist of the manga that they want to create. And they're both very interesting, very different people, but they also both have this really good chemistry. It kind of feels like, and I don't want to say this because I haven't got confirmation, it kind of does feel like this is based on the relationship between the artist and the writer of the actual manga, because they have opposing ideas. The two characters have lots of opposing ideas, but they kind of they see each other's end of the spectrum. It always annoys me in fiction, in any forms, books, movies, anime, anything, where you have two characters who disagree, and they just flat out just disagree with each other through the entire thing until either one ends up killing the other one, or the other one just randomly sees the other guy's point and completely, converts over to that guy's side. But this is a cool way of dealing with it, where it's very realistic, where the two characters, they have opposing points, and they take into consideration the other person's, feelings, and it's just it feels so minor, but when you read it, you realize it's so more real than most fiction, where characters just snap and they all of a sudden have a different opinion. Like, it's the slow progression of other people convincing the character of, maybe he's wrong or maybe he should rethink things. And sometimes they just flat out don't agree with the other person because they just, even though they hear all the points, they add it up and they don't, so they still have their own opinion. And I feel like that's a really good driving force of this book. It's just the characters in general and how their outlook on life. Like, there are a lot of long monologues. If you don't like dialogue, I would recommend you stay as far away from this book as possible. But if you're into character development, like books that are like, let's find out about this character, let's flesh out this character, what this character thinks of life, then I highly recommend this book. It really does have a really good grasp on what the characters would act like in different situations. Like, you never get it. There's one point which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but most of the time when they act, you can see where they're coming from, and they never act out of character except for this one time. So there's one bit in the book which I'll go more in depth with my spoiler bit of this review, but it doesn't follow the same. I feel like, you're welcome to disagree, but I feel like it doesn't follow the same pattern that the book sets out, and it's very jarring. It pulls you out for a bit, but then the book gets kind of back to what it was the roots at. And I feel like they only did the moment so they can have this exciting thing that'll keep going. It's kind of hard to talk about without spoiling it, which is why I'm going to do a spoiler part. But except for this one, I just want to express, except for this one moment in the book, which everyone will know what I'm talking about if they've read it and when they do read it, it feels like the characters are very consistent and the writer has a good grasp on the characters and that he's creating. There's nothing much else to say. The art is really good, but it's nothing super amazing, but it is really good, like, compared to some stuff I've seen. But I would definitely only recommend picking this up if you're into, characters. Because other than that, maybe if you're into the manga, like, creating industry, like, it does have a lot of, like, it's written and drawn by two people who've been in the industry for a while. And it has lots and lots of references to manga. Like, not just other mangas, but it has lots of references to how manga's made. It teaches you a lot of stuff. I learned a lot from this book on, like, how the development of manga works and how it's, like, a really competitive industry. So even though it's fictional, it's also in some parts non-fiction. Like, you feel like it's straight up just the writer telling you about the manga industries, but using the voice of the characters. So I felt like, all in all, if you're into that sort of stuff that I just talked about, definitely pick this book up. But if not, I wouldn't recommend it because there's not much going on plot-wise. Okay, so that's over. Apologies for the length. I might cut that down. Anyway, spoilers. Big, massive spoiler sign. This is going to be more of the just discussion. I'm going to call it a review anyway because I'm just going to be like, this is my opinions on the things that happened in the book, but it's going to be more just me discussing what happened in the book. I wish I had someone else who'd read this book that can do this with me, but I don't, so what you can do. Anyway, moving on. First, I'm going to go through the characters because I feel like that's an easy way to do it. I'm going to go through the two main characters, talk about them for a bit, and then I have their names. I actually have this all written down. So, apologies for my pronunciation. Tell me in the comments if I fuck this up, which I probably will. But Moritaka, he's the writer in the book. He's the one that eventually he's the artist in the book. He's the one that eventually ends up drawing the manga. He's kind of the main character. I don't know because I'm only into volume 1, but he is the one we really do follow mostly in the first volume. We follow his journey to not wanting to draw the manga up until he does want to draw it, then he completes it. So, like, I feel like in this volume especially, he's the main character, and I do feel like it's the sort of book where it might switch it up sometimes. Like, we'll switch, maybe in volume 2 or 3, we'll switch to a different character. I'm not sure yet. I haven't read them. But just for the purpose of this review, he's the main character. And I feel like he's a good main character in the sense of he's very, like, he's very reflective of most people his age. which I feel like this book is aimed to. He's 14, but he kind of acts like he's like above 40. He feels like a 16-year-old in a 14-year-old's body. Like he feels like he's a bit more, I'm he's not like he's better than everyone else. He just feels like he's done. He's finished with school already. He's just going there because he has to. Like he doesn't feel like there's anything else to learn. And I really liked his attitude at this. Not liked it, like I've agreed with it, but I like the idea that he has this attitude of just, he's got no motivation. Like he's got zero motivation in life. He's just, like he talks about the only reason he wants to get a job and get good grades is because that's what's expected of him. And he doesn't want people to think he's a shut-in. It's really cool how like, it's in his inner monologue, so he's not really open with it. But to us, to the audience, he's open with the fact that he's just cares about what people think of him, but he doesn't really care where his life goes. And as the book goes on, you find out more that he wanted to be something originally, and he kind of lost that dream when he lost his uncle. So it's really cool to start off with this character that just kind of has no motivation, because there's lots of places to go with him, which is shown by his love interest. I do want to talk about his love interest, because it is the one thing about the character that's kind of unbelievable. For such a relatable character, for such a character that like you could almost envision being in real life. Like it's very, he's a character that you could envision meeting and hanging out with, or even being yourself. Like when you read this book, you can maybe even see yourself in it. I didn't, but I see people that I know in this character. For all that, like it does feel like his love interest is a bit like unrealistic, and they even comment on the fact that it's unrealistic in the book. Like they talk about how he's never spoken to her, so how can he be in love with her? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. But it's acted like he is in love with her. He's just, I think maybe it'll take a turn, and like he realized that he wasn't in love with her, which I would like. But that's all speculation. For this volume, we're meant to believe that he's in love with this girl just because he looks at her and he looks pretty. So she looks pretty and he likes her and he draws pictures of her. If they didn't play it off as love, if they played it off as just he really likes her and he'd really like to go out with her, I'd be like, yeah, I get that. But I get in manga, they kind of jump to love. They jump the whole like liking and affection stage of relationships, and they always just jump, oh, he loves her, he's in love with her all the time. So I understand that, but it is kind of annoying when so much of this character is grounded in realism, and then there's just that one bit where it's like, oh yeah, he's in love with this girl that he's never talked to ever before, and he's just seen her. So I like that about the character. There's not much else to him. He goes through a really cool character arc. I like the bit where when I keep forgetting this is a spoiler bit, so I can talk about it. The bit I was annoyed at when he asked the girl if she becomes a voice actress and his manga becomes an anime and they get to collaborate, then they'll marry each other. And I feel like it really didn't fit quite well with him. Like, he feels like the type of guy that would blurt something out akin to that, but not as extreme. Like, it feels like he would be like, would you go out with me or something? Or like, would you consider, I don't know, living together at most? But he doesn't really feel like the character who would jump to that. And I get that that's supposed to be the comedic bit of it. Like, when he says, will you marry me? It feels like it's supposed to be, a comedy aspect. But because considering the book was so grounded in realism up until that point, I was just like taken out of it a bit. And more so when she replied with yes. Like, I could have lived with that moment if it was like he asks this and she's like, I like you, but that's a bit extreme. Like, she's the voice of reason in that situation, but they're both utterly insane because she says yes. And even when she says yes, I was expecting him to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that maybe that was a bit too extreme, but he was still like, yay. And then he spends the rest of the book being like, yeah, we're going to get married when we do this. And I really felt like that was a bit too, like, it was a bit too unreal. And I get that, like, it's a different culture, but I think even in Japan, that would be a bit of a stretch to, ask someone who you've never talked to in your life, will you marry me? And then them say yes. At first, I thought it was tacked on because they didn't have a motivation. They needed him to be motivated to draw the manga. But they give him a really, really, really good reasons for wanting to draw the manga later on in the book. In like later on in volume 1, they talk about how like he's not motivated by the girl anymore. He is still motivated by her, but his main motivation is the fact that he doesn't want to be a bum in life. He wants to be, and he kind of goes through this really cool character arc. I was like, why not just leave the bit out about the girl? Like, I understand that was a funny joke, but it wasn't funny enough to ruin the story. And it didn't ruin it. When you get over it, you're just like, okay, that's a thing that's going to run throughout the manga now. But like, you hope that it doesn't. Every time it gets brought up, I grimace, because I'm just like, I don't feel like that needed to be there. Like, I feel like they could have still had a funny line that didn't affect the story as much. So I enjoyed his character, but he's definitely not my favorite, because the writer in it, Akito, I'm assuming again, comment if I'm wrong. Akito is the writer of the manga, and he's the funniest guy, like, in the entire book, because he's so extreme in his personality, but just not extreme enough that you couldn't see him as being a real person. Like, he's an extreme character, but as much as like you meet someone in real life, you're like, whoa, that's an extreme person. Like he's so crazy in his thoughts, but not so much that you're like, that person wouldn't exist. Like, he just feels like someone who has crazy thoughts, not a fictional character who's crazy. And I think he's so fascinating. Like this, like, he's probably the most interesting character in the book, because just his outlook on life. Like, first of all, when you meet him, one of his first lines is like, he's really good at seeing things and like noticing things, because he always talks about how he sits at the back of the class and he watches the class, and like he notices things that other people wouldn't, because he just watches. And that's really interesting. But what's more interesting is that he has opinions on everything. Like, he's very opinionated, and he'll tell people those opinions and in depth, and he'll explain why he has them. And I always, like, a lot of people would just be like, this is boring. It's just one dude giving a big speech about what he thinks of people. But to me, that was really interesting. I really liked that bit. And especially his speech on what he thinks makes people smart, because that speech it's so long-winded and insane. Like, it's enjoyable. I wouldn't say I agree with him, but I'm not sure you're supposed to agree with him. I feel like you're supposed to be like, this is what this character thinks. If you think similar to him, fair enough, but you don't have to. You just have to know that this is what this character thinks, and it's why he does the things he does. And as soon as he says that speech, everything he does starts to make sense. Like, every way he acts, everything he does, it begins to like make sense. Like, you understand why he does the things he does, like, because of that speech on what he thinks makes people smart. And he has a couple more speeches, but I feel like that is his character. He sees the world differently to everyone else, and it's not necessarily a wrong way, it's just a different way. He does feel like a writer as well, like the way that he interprets people, like, and the way that he has so many opinions on like what things could be and what things should be. Like, he feels like he's perfect for the role of writer. Like, you haven't really seen much, other than the fact that he's a good drawer, of the artist being an artist, if you know what I mean. Like, he hasn't really expressed much in his personality that would mean he was, perfect to be the artist, other than the fact that he can draw, and that his uncle used to draw. Whereas this guy, like, he's a writer. He sees the world like some writers see it. I also like his enthusiasm. Like, he's really enthusiastic about everything. He always uplifts everyone else in the book. Like, when they're feeling down, they'll explain something that they feel is bad, and you'll always see the bright side to it. And he kind of inspires the character who plays, the artist character to do, like, he pulls him up, and he's like, you should do something with your life. And at first it's like, it doesn't work, but the more he hammers on, the more it works. And it's just, you just have this really cool effect on other characters in the books. And I do feel like the one thing he suffers from is, a lot of characters have this in different animes. Like, there's an anime called My Little Monster, which some people might have seen. It's a manga as well, where there's a character that suffers from the same thing as this. He's smart, like academically smart, not smart as in the way that he sees people as smart, but he's smart for no reason. He's the top of the class just because he has to be the top of the class. Like, he's smart because they don't want to deal with giving this character academic challenges, which I'm like, I feel like they'd give a reason. I feel like, because in the manga My Little Monster, they talk about why he's so smart, because he was like confined. No spoilers for that, but he was like confined, and all he did was read books all the time. Whereas this character, I feel like maybe he'll be explored in later volumes, but for just this volume, it's annoying how he's just smart for no good reason. He just is smart, and like that plays into why he wants to be a writer, because he's just like, it's not enough to just be smart and get a smart job. You have to be creative, and you have to have aspirations that is hard to reach, because that what makes you a person. Yeah, but other than that, he's an interesting character. He's definitely my favorite in the book so far. I mean, it's only the first volume, so who knows? I do also feel like he kind of acts as like the Doctor's assistant. If you ever watched Doctor Who, you'll know what I mean. There's always got to be this character that's there so that the Doctor can explain things to her or him, and then through that we understand it. Like, it gives the Doctor a reason to explain things, whereas otherwise he would just do them because he knows what he's doing, and he he's the Doctor. Whereas this, Akio, I think his name is Akito, whatever, the writer, or if he knew everything about the manga industry as well, there wouldn't be any reason for the artist character. I'm very confused. The artist character to explain to us how it works. So he works in that respect as well. So yeah, they're the two main characters. There's nothing much else I want to talk about because it is a very character-driven story. I do feel like the story isn't that forced. Like, for what it is, it's not a very forced story. It's interesting, and it does feel like it gives the characters reasons to talk about the things they talk about, but also not all their conversations are based around manga, and I like that. I like that the story isn't just there to be. It's not like, in action movies, sometimes the story is, made around the action. Just the action scenes are plotted, and then the story is just put there to give reasons for the action scenes. It doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like the story is there for the conversations they have. Sometimes it does. Sometimes, they'll talk about something to do with manga, but then other times they'll just talk about life in general. And it won't have anything to do with manga because, teenagers don't always just talk about one thing. They'll have conversations about, what they believe and what they think life is. And it's interesting to know that these characters are prone to grow. Like, one character goes through a massive character arc and changes who he is in just the first volume. So that's interesting because it's not just going to be one of those generic mangas where everyone stays the same throughout and no one ever changes. Like, people are prone to change in this manga so far, so I'm excited to see who will change eventually. Overall, if I had to rate this out of 5, which I think I'm going to start doing if people like this, if people even listen to this till the end, because other than the fact that not a lot of people might have read this manga and might not would have listened to the spoiler bit of it. Also, it's a very long review, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to say a lot about it. And hopefully Volume 2 either won't be as long, or I'll have someone else who has read Volume 2 to come on with me, so it'll be more interesting. Anyway, I think I'm going to rate this 4 or 5. It might have been a 4.5, but the moment where he proposes to her is just too unrealistic. And it really brought me out of the story just for a couple of pages, where I was just like, ugh. So I'm going to put this 4 out of 5. I will get to the second one. I've already purchased the second one because it was so interesting. I picked it up the next day. I will get to that as soon as I've read it. Leave in a comment below if you're a YouTuber and you would be interested in reviewing the second one with me. And yes, I'll see you guys in a bit. Thanks for listening to this very, very long review.